students, this video is going to explain how to write the first body paragraph to an argument essay. So, first, we need to talk about the purpose of this argumentative essay. What you need to do is select a side, either Antigone's side or Creon's side. Then, you need to prove one character is right and the other character wrong. Now, if you don't think that either character is wrong, you can instead argue that one character is more right than the other character. So how are we going to do this? Well, you're going to format an opposition paragraph as your first body paragraph. Remember that the opposition is when you address the opinions that those who disagree with you might have. So you're going to talk about what other people might think is true, and then explain to them why they're wrong in thinking that. And in this paragraph, you'll start with a topic sentence, move on to your first piece of evidence, then your elaboration, a second piece of evidence, and then further elaboration, and then transition to the next part of your essay. Now, before we continue, I have to issue a warning. In the upcoming video, I'm going to give you amazing ideas, but you may not use any of my ideas or writing in your own paragraph. You need to come up with your own ideas and write them in your own way. If you are already thinking what I write, you can write about it as well, but it needs to be in your own words, using different pieces of evidence and explaining that evidence in your own way. All right, now that you've been warned, let's complete the topic sentence of your opposition paragraph. Now to do this, you first need to decide who you're supporting. So I'm going to support Creon. Creon is right. And then I'm going to prove that Antigone is less right, because I don't really think Antigone was completely wrong. I just think she was less right than Creon, or at least I'm going to argue that in my essay. Now, how am I going to argue this? Well, I'm going to explain that Antigone was less right religiously than Creon was. So, for my topic sentence, I might write, though Creon was the most correct in his decisions throughout the play, Antigone did create a fair argument in her views of Greek religion. So I'm clearly establishing that Creon is the one I'm supporting. But I also establish that I'm going to give Antigone a little slack and explain how she was kind of right also. And that will occur in my opposition paragraph, because my opposition is going to say that Antigone was completely right. And therefore, I'm going to prove why they are wrong by saying she was right, but not as right as Creon. Now, that I have my topic sentence written, I'm going to move on to my evidence. Now, for my first piece of evidence, I might write, for instance, note how I start with a transition phrase. You could have for instance or for example. And then I write, when Creon demands that Antigone follows his laws to not bury Polynices, she declares. So this is what we call a tag phrase. This tag phrase is where I give context to what my quote will be about. If I just drop this quote in there, people are going to have no idea what's going on. So I first explained what's happening in the quote, and then I give the quote. Zeus did not announce those laws to me, and justice living with the gods below set no such laws for men. I did not think anything which you proclaimed strong enough to let a moral override the gods and their unwritten and unchanging laws. So I include my quote in quotation marks, and then at the very end, I put Sophocles, page 16. And you'll get the page numbers from the text that we read in class. And don't forget that with your in-text citation, parentheses, author's last name, page number, close parentheses, period at the very end. And that's your piece of evidence. Once you have your evidence, next comes the elaboration, where you explain how your evidence proves your point. So now, my point is that Antigone is less right than Creon. So in my elaboration, I'm going to explain how Antigone was kind of right in the quote she just had. But later on, I'm going to show why Creon is more right. So in my elaboration, I explain Antigone holds the laws of gods higher than the laws of men. She believes that Polynices must be buried so that the gods can decide what kind of afterlife he deserves. She also believes that Creon should not have the power to get in the way of the gods' decisions. In Greek culture, Antigone would be right, because the Greeks believed that gods were all-powerful and that humans should respect their power. So here, I explain step by step why Antigone is sort of right. You're going to have to figure out your step-by-step reasoning. After you write your elaboration, it's very important to go back and make sure that you have fully explained yourself. And if you're worried that you haven't, have someone else read it, and they'll be able to let you know if they understand your argumentative process. To kind of point out how mine goes, I first explain what Antigone thinks. She thinks that the laws of gods are higher than the laws of man. Then I explain how this applies more specifically to the text. She believes that Polynices must be buried because the gods, the laws of the gods, need to decide what kind of afterlife he will have or deserves. Then I elaborate to say she believes that Creon shouldn't get in the way of the law of gods because his law is just the laws of man. So essentially what I do in these sentences is I explain what she believes thoroughly. I explain she holds the laws of gods over laws of man, and then I explain what she believes the laws of gods are, and then I explain again how Creon's laws of man is inferior in her mind. Then I also continue to say that in Greek culture, she's right, because the Greeks agreed with her, that gods were more powerful than humans. Today, not everyone believes this, but back then, in Greek culture, people did believe that. So make sure to write your elaboration as a step-by-step argument that explains how your evidence proves your purpose. Now, if I stopped here, I would just be proving that Antigone is correct. What I want to prove is that while she's correct, Creon is more correct. So to do that, I need to move on to my second piece of evidence. And for that, I write, however, now this however is very important. The however means that I'm about to disagree with what was written before. If I wrote also, it would mean I was going to agree. If I wrote similarly, it would mean I was going to agree. However, here I'm writing however. I could also write in opposition or a better view is. And these things would show that I'm about to go against what was just said. So I write, however, Creon is more correct than Antigone because of his later statement, alas, it's difficult, but I'll give up. I'll not do what I'd set my heart upon. It's not right to fight against necessity. 37. So here I have my transition and I have my tag phrase. I explain to my readers that this quote is going to show how Creon is more correct than Antigone. I have my quote and then I have my page number. I do not need to put Sophocles in my in-text citation again because he's the only writer that I'm writing about. Therefore, you only need to put the author's last name in your first in-text citation. Then after that, you can just include page numbers. Now that I have my second piece of evidence, I'm going to move to my elaboration. So for my final piece of elaboration, I'm going to explain how that evidence proves my point that Antigone is less right than Creon. So I say, after Tiresias warns Creon that the gods are furious with his actions, Creon quickly rejects his previous actions. Before he was only following his heart, yet once he learns the gods disagree, he says it's not right to fight against necessity. So I explain how Creon was actually trying just to do the right thing. And I'm saying because he was trying to do the right thing, he therefore wasn't in the wrong. So I explain how Creon's mind is changed and why he changes his mind. Now, there's one more step to bring my argument all the way home. and that's going to occur in my wrap-up. So in my wrap-up, I finalize my argument to prove my point to the degree that no one can argue with me, and I write therefore. You could write therefore, in conclusion, ultimately, in the end. You have to have some kind of transition. So I put therefore, Creon was not trying to disobey the gods. He was simply doing what he thought right until the gods shared their opinions through Tiresias. Had the gods spoke to Creon sooner, he would have changed his mind sooner. He cannot be blamed for actions that he had no way of knowing were wrong. So I finalized my argument by wrapping it all together. That while Antigone was saying Creon was trying to disobey the gods, I say she's wrong. He wasn't trying to disobey the gods. He was actually doing what he thought was right. But then Tiresias finally spoke to him. And then that is when Creon knew the truth, and he immediately changed his mind. And then I kind of point out that if the gods had explained to him sooner, he would have changed his mind sooner, further proving that it wasn't his fault. It's almost more the gods' fault than his for kind of giving him the silent treatment. And then I established my final statement. He can't be blamed for his actions because he didn't know they were wrong. Now, you might agree with this, or you might disagree with this, and it's even better if you disagree, because then you can kind of use some of that disagreement in your own essay. But ultimately, this is the way that your paragraph will look. You have your topic sentence, your evidence, your elaboration, further evidence, further elaboration, and then your wrap-up. Now, this paragraph is pretty long, but this is an example of an A-level legendary paragraph. I want you to work towards this. It might seem like a lot, but notice most of the length is fairly long quotes, and then mostly the elaboration. And the elaboration is what's most important. If you just write one sentence of elaboration, you're not going to fully explain yourself, and therefore you won't fully convince your readers to believe you. Your elaboration should be multiple sentences that takes readers through your arguments step by step. Now make sure you still have overall organization with topic sentences, evidence, elaboration, and then the wrap-up at the end. But make sure that you're also fully giving me everything you have in each of those sections. All right, I hope this helps. Good luck on writing your paragraph. I will see you tomorrow.